to illuminate the often unseen mental health challenges faced by first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and 911 dispatchers by sharing their stories, fostering understanding, and promoting resources for support and healing. We aim to break down stigma, advocate for improved mental health services within the first responder community, and inspire hope and resilience. This is the Weight We Carry podcast. What's going on, guys? I am Bart with the Weight We Carry podcast, and today we have a very special guest, Jeff Kelly, Territorial Manager of QMC and EMS Billing Specialist and a paramedic. And also today, everyone was waiting. Guess who's here?
Hi, guys.
My wife, Brittany. Thank you for coming in finally, babe. So, Jeff, how you been, man?
I've been really good, my friend. Very good.
It's, man, we met, 2007, 2008, and like I was just saying before, you were one of my biggest cheerleaders when I first got into EMS as a fresh new EMT with my card. It was still wet with my with my numbers and everything on it, but it really was. I was excited to have you on to the show because you're one of the starts for me, one of the main people that I learned some really good stuff from, and it made me into a really good provider. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming on, man.
Well, I appreciate you having me. And I think like back then, even not today, right? I was always trying to be a steward of the EMS folks. I wasn't trying to tell people to run away. I embraced that career, and I think you've done a great job embracing it as well. So,
yeah, it was a great career. I loved it. Loved every minute of it. But other than that, let's how do you think? Well, I don't know. What do you want to talk about here?
I say we jump into the questions.
You want to start jumping to questions? Let's do it. All right, Jeff, you ready?
absolutely.
How about you tell us a little bit more about your journey in the fire and EMS and what first drew you into the field?
Yeah. So I would, like a lot of folks, I would say I was born into it. When I was born in 1970 something, my dad was the volunteer fire chief at the time, and he stepped away from that position to start to raise us. And when I became 16, I got into the volunteer fire service. Didn't really know much about EMS. I knew it existed, but didn't really know much about it. I was doing the volunteer fire thing, and then I went away to college for athletic training and sports medicine. I was a wrestler, and so I was involved in athletics and wanted to continue that, but I liked healthcare. And we were working on a football field one day at Baldwin Wallace College in Berea, Ohio, and a guy blew his knee out. And the paramedics came to take care of him, and I was like, well, that was kind of cool. Like, right? Like, they immobilized him, gave him meds, and I'm like, maybe there's something to this. So I called my parents and said, hey, I'm going to finish out this freshman year, and I'm coming back to Pittsburgh. And so I did that and enrolled in an EMT class in 1993 and started, got into EMS, was volunteering at Shaler area back then when it was brand new. And then it was just awesome, right? Loved being on an ambulance, loved being an EMT. And then I got drugged to paramedic class by some folks I was working with who said, come on, we're going to go. And I was like, I don't know to go to paramedic class. And I went, and it was 97, it was $250 plus some books, and got my paramedic in 98 and loved it, right? Loved providing care. At the same time, though, I was working as a dispatcher for Norcom.
Okay.
I was a 911 dispatcher. Yeah. And so I did the dispatch thing full time and did the paramedic thing on the side, volunteered a bunch of places, Shaler, Hampton, Ross, Westview. And then as luck would have it, I guess, Ron Coleman, fellow RWV guy, said, hey, I'm going to go take this fire test in Montgomery County, Maryland. Why don't you come with me? So I did. Got hired, right? 1,600 people took the test, one of 33 folks to get hired.
Wow.
So it was kind of cool. So uprooted a new life, right? I got the job the day before my first marriage. So I got the job in Maryland, drove back to Pittsburgh, got married the next day, went on my honeymoon, came back, moved to Maryland. No stress, right?
None.
My son was born in Maryland. So yeah, I was working for Montgomery County in 2001. Decided to move back to Pittsburgh for some job opportunities. Started working with Ross West EMS as a paramedic, and then got promoted to supervisor. It was 2006. Stayed there till 2010, and spent a year at UPMC pre-hospital care, and then went to Cranberry Township EMS 2011. 2011. Became the executive director there. And I was there till 2019 when I left to explore greener pastures in Washington, D.C. Went back down to the Delmarva area, worked for the AMR as a director of operations. Loved that job. Yeah, it was great. Loved it. It was fantastic. Really great opportunity. Did a lot of really cool things. But as a lot of things happen in corporate, right, there were some structure changes and some things that I wasn't really keen with. So I looked for a way to get back to Pittsburgh, which I did. Came back to work for Allegheny Health Network as the manager of Cannonsburg Ambulance.
Okay.
And then was promoted to the director of transport. So in that position, I oversaw all of the transport entities that AHN had. So the response trucks, Cannonsburg Ambulance still, and then the non-emergency side of things.
Oh, wow.
And I was doing that for a while during COVID. So I worked for a health system during COVID, which was pretty rough, right? We were pretty busy. Not so much on the trucks, but just, every day, all day surge planning, meetings, follow-up stuff, just a lot of stuff. And then completed my master's degree during COVID in public administration. And so was looking for something to do with that. And in 2021, I guess it was, the MRTSA had an executive director position. So I thought I would dip my toes back into like true EMS management leadership. And I got into it, and about 6 months into it, I was like, I don't really think this was what I wanted to do. And so I started putting out some feelers and looking for some things, and had always been affiliated with QMC. We were a client when I was at Cranberry. I did documentation training for them as an independent contractor. So they sent me around the country doing doc training for their clients. And so I always kind of knew about the organization. And they reached out to me and said, hey, we have this sales position we think you might be good for. And so I started here in the beginning of 23. So I'm starting my third year. Cover 19 states.
Oh, wow.
Geographical Northeast and West through like Ohio, Michigan. But have to do a lot of education, right? So I'm learning a lot about state Medicaid programs and always learning about the billing side of things, and still staying connected to the industry, but in a different facet. But I've 30 plus years in EMS. I've certainly had my share of mental health challenges and personal hurdles as well. So that was really what drew me to you guys putting this together. So thanks. So that's who I am. Married, 3 kids, couple of dogs, guinea pig.
That's awesome. And we were talking before. It's pretty cool now that your kids are getting into public safety and following your footsteps. It's neat to see watching them grow up.
It is. I will just tell you that it's a different perspective. My son was a full-time paramedic at Penn Hill EMS a couple of years ago when they unfortunately experienced a line of duty death. And you come at that a little bit differently as a parent, than I would have as a coworker. I mean, I've experienced some serious tragedies as a coworker, but when it's your kid that's hurting and dealing with it, it treated a little bit differently. You guys will see that, right? Once your kid gets involved, it'll be different when you're a parent. But yeah, that's very rewarding.
I'm a little, I wouldn't say concerned, but I know, like I said, what I went through, with the mental health stuff, and when Logan's like, yeah, I want to maybe go into the public safety, firefighter, those line of things. And I'm like, okay, but we need to talk. You need to know what you're getting yourself into for sure. So
yeah, especially at such a young age too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's, I think, the big thing, right? And I didn't realize that until, unfortunately, we had our unfortunate circumstances at Cranberry, right? So you recognize that whole frontal lobe doesn't mature until you're 25.
Yeah.
But yet we'll allow kids at 14, 15, 16 to see things that they shouldn't see until 25 or late,
See when I was 30.
I wasn't even old enough to drive to the station. My parents were dropping me off, and I'm going on these calls, and you're just like, holy cow.
Yeah. I saw my first dead body when I was 16.
And I wasn't ready at 30. When I did, that was a whole shock. It really was.
Right.
Wow. Well, you've had such a long career in various roles. Are there any specific moments or experiences that shape who you are today as both a provider and a leader?
Yeah, I think there's many, right? I think good and bad. I've had some great calls and challenges and rewards, but I've also had, at the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And I think that's what really has made this job rewarding, is because even when it was really low, you try to find those things that it can get better, right? It will get better. I always tell people, no one calls EMS to have tea and crumpets, right?
Yeah.
They're calling when
Worst
they need
times.
something. Yeah. So you're seeing people at their worst times, but then you're also there for some really great times, right? I've delivered a handful of babies. I've been there. I've had successful resuscitations, and so you have some really good things that happen in EMS as well. But my very first EMS call, I was like 2 weeks out of EMT class, was my next door neighbor who went into cardiac arrest. It was like a second dad to me, right? And I heard the medics get dispatched there, and went running over and found him in cardiac arrest. So,
Jeez.
my brand new EMT doing CPR on a guy that I'd known almost my whole life was a little bit traumatizing, right? But so yeah,
it's so polarizing. We had, like you said, these extreme highs and then the extreme lows, and you have those in between things with your non-emergency transports. You know how that goes. But when I was getting into it, I had no clue really, because I didn't have any of the fire experience. I didn't, as a teenager, I wasn't in the firehouse like a lot of the people that we do know. So getting into it, I had no real understanding of. You get so when you're in class, they give you some ideas on how things are going to go, but until you actually see it, especially as a 30-year-old, as an adult, and it was very eye-opening. It was very eye-opening.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I feel, looking back on it, I don't think I would have done anything differently. I feel like being exposed to it, on the outskirts a little bit from the fire side, and that was where I saw my first dead body, right? It was actually with the fire department. We were on a vehicle crash where a girl had died. So it wasn't even an EMS thing, right? It was just a fire thing. But, taking those experiences and learning from them, learning how to, lead a better life, learning how to take joy in the things that we have. I think to me, that's the biggest part of what this profession, if you let it, it can take that from you, right? Like, don't let it take the joy. Find the things that you can be good at, and find the things that can help you be resilient. And that's really what I've tried to, as a leader, that's what I've tried to instill in my folks. I mean, I've unfortunately gone through some significant dark times as a leader with my crews and staff, and it's been horrendous, and then as a provider, I've done some really just been on some terrible calls, right? So yeah, like I said, just try to take the good with the bad and be resilient with it.
So you've mentioned your first EMS call being the cardiac arrest of your neighbor. How did that moment impact your perspective on mental health in this field?
I think it exposed me right away to how close to home it could hit. I've heard people say, oh, I don't want to work where I live, or I don't, whether it's a police officer or firefighter. I went 4.5 hours away and worked in Montgomery County, Maryland, and the first person I ran into was good friends with a guy that lived up the street. Like, it's a small world.
It really is.
You don't want to think that, but I feel like the impact for me was a lot of processing, right? I mean, understanding how quick everything happened, and how we weren't successful, right? And you didn't have a good outcome. So right away, I'm introduced to, we don't save everybody, right? So the TV shows and the movies obviously have it wrong. Not everybody is saved. And so learning that at a very early age, right, as my first call, was like, okay, well, if this is as bad as it is, right, where I had one patient and I'm 0 for 1, right, from a batting perspective, right, it's got to get better from here. And so that really kind of fueled me to just to do better and to be more empathetic. And I saw that again from my first call from a different perspective, because I saw that the impact it had on the family. It wasn't just about the patient that we didn't save. It was about the family who I very personally knew, I grew up next to. Now you have to deal with that. So those kind of things, I think, helped me when I became a supervisor at Ross, and we're now the only person, let's say, on the scene of a DOA where we have to deal with everything, right? We have to deal with the family and helping them navigate, through the funeral home and the other family members and all that kind of stuff. I feel like those, again, experiences, you kind of build upon those and learn from them. And so that's what I take from it.
Yeah. I think family can definitely be one of the hardest to deal with. So when I worked in the hospital, unfortunately, we lost, he was a young man, a dad, and from my desk, I can see into his room, and I just watched his daughter fall to the ground, and she didn't move for hours. She sat on the hospital floor and just cried, and that's like the one thing that I can still picture in my 11 years working at the hospital is this poor lady just sitting on the floor weeping for her dad to come back. And it was sad during the code and trying to bring him back, but really that part that sticks with me is her face and just watching her sit there and cry. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and to go back to when I was 16 to the first dead person that I saw, like on the fireside, the family showed up there unexpectedly, right? So like nobody expected them to be there. They showed up at the crash, recognized the car, knew, we had a tarp on it and everything. So, right, that impact when you're that young was pretty crazy. And so I go from that to, thinking about calls that I've been on where, everybody's like, you need to do something. And it's like, but I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do that's going to bring this person back,
Yeah.
So to Bart's point, there's not stuff they teach you in class.
You can't really prepare for it, and you really can't until it actually happens. You don't know how you're gonna react to it,
or even like what calls are gonna be the ones that truly bother you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the younger that you experience those, unfortunately, the longer they're going to stay with you. I was one of my first shooting calls was a husband and wife domestic in the street, right? He shot her and then shot himself. And so we're working on both of them, and they had adult children show up, and we pronounced her, and now we're working on him, and the kids are just yelling and screaming at you, why are you helping him? He's a piece of shit, and so you're just like torn, like, well, this is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And, and these folks are like, look what he just did to our mother, and you're trying to save him. And it's like, oh, I didn't sign up for this, right? Like you just don't think about that.
This wasn't in the book. Who am I supposed to go for first?
Yeah, exactly. So rapid triage. Yeah, it's experiences, right? Again, like I said, nobody prepared you for, hey, you're going to be in the middle of the other thing was, right, we're in the street, it's 8:00 in the morning, and there's a school bus stop full of kids.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So it's like, nobody prepares you for that. And they certainly don't prepare you to be accosted by other adults for doing your job. So
there's like the trivia questions. They're like, what would you do in this? And they keep throwing stuff at you, and you're like, you're a jerk. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Bing.
Listen, I feel like that's been my whole career in EMS has always been like a hold my beer moment, like
both.
Not a one up kind of thing, right? But it's just like I have so many stories, right? Just crazy stories of just everything that I've experienced and seen. And to your point, some stuff you're just like, I'm never going to see that again. You're like, but you will.
And a lot of people, though, if we wrote a book, they wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't
I'm
believe.
still working on my book. So my book is entitled So We Get There, because that's how every good story starts, right?
Heck.
And,
all right, cool.
And I'm still anecdotally putting things in and doing research on, like, I had a bunch of national calls, right, that were on the national news and different things. And so just trying to put that stuff. That's, to me, journaling has really been helpful.
It's awesome.
Like
Yeah.
journaling early on, but now going back and pulling that stuff out and, using it in writing a book is pretty helpful.
Oh, you better let me know, because I'll buy I want a signed copy.
Yeah. If I ever get it done. Yeah.
You will. So can you share some of the challenges that you faced personally with PTSD and anxiety throughout your career? What were the signs that told you that it was finally time to seek help?
So the first time that I was reaching out for help was a time where I had 3 bad shifts in a row, right? And decided I just didn't want to go to work, right? Like, I got up and thought to myself, I don't want to go to work because I'm afraid of what I'm going to experience. Right? Who's going to die? Whose house is going to burn? Like, what am I going to be a part of? And so I reached out to, I asked a coworker, somebody that they talked with, and they provided me an office, not necessarily the doctor. And I went to that office, and within the first 30 minutes, when I was kind of vomiting my issues, I looked over and the therapist was crying. And I was like, okay, this is obviously not working, right? So I left that office and was able to find somebody else who was able to talk through the things that I was dealing with. That was the first time earlier in my career, and then most recently when I was at Cranberry Township EMS, and we had a rash of really bad stuff happen, and having to deal with it in a bunch of different fashions, right? It was a couple months after that when somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, why?" And they're like, "Well, being sad doesn't mean you're being depressed doesn't mean you're sad. Like, you can be depressed and not be sad." And really, they hit the nail on the head, right? I was just going through the motions. I was coming to work every day. I wasn't really punching the clock, but I was acting like I was punching the clock, just kind of going through everything. And so I went and saw somebody and talked a lot about, the things that had been sort of building up and going through my history and my experience. And, again, what I've realized, right, is that you needed to find a way to have an outlet or to have, to build that resiliency. And so I did. And, it wasn't easy. It's certainly not easy. I spend a lot of time thinking about, what the next thing is going to be or what you're going to have to deal with next. But at the same time, you got the person on your other shoulder saying, "Listen, you got to get up, you got to get back. Those people need you." And I think that that's a different mentality from being a provider and on the streets to being in charge of all those other folks.
Yeah.
It's a much, much different thought process, versus dealing with one patient and maybe your partner, where now I'm responsible for 40 people and their families, and all of that stuff. And, unfortunately, our circumstances, when we had our provider suicide, that was the sting there was that we were working with that person, right? We were talking with them. We were trying to help them. We were trying to do right by them. And we felt like we did all of the things that we were supposed to do. And in the end, it still had that negative outcome. And it was just super defeating. Super defeating.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's I know which event you're referring to, and that was tough for the whole community. I mean, especially being that was one of your people. That's such a hard thing to have to deal with. And like you said, not just as a partner or anything, but the whole scope of things and the families and all of the other employees there too. So
one of the hardest things I ever had to do was the next morning, right? So we shut down for a couple of hours and did a mandatory staff meeting in the morning and assembled everybody. And, I had to get up in front of them and tell them basically what had happened. And there were only a couple of people that knew. Everybody else had no idea why they were there. Mm-hmm. And so, I had to tell them, "Hey, listen, here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do moving forward. Here's how we're going to lean on each other, and here's how we're going to deal with it." And interestingly, that individual's family came to me and said, "Listen, we want to work with you so that no other family has to go through this."
that's awesome.
It was fantastic, right? His mom came down from Canada and we're like, "Hey, we're going to be champions of making this happen." And then a month later, she died of an accidental overdose.
Jeez.
Right. And so now I'm going from, "Hey, we're going to turn this bad thing into something good." And now yet here we are again with this next issue. Right. And then we go the next month where one of our providers and his wife lose a baby at 37 weeks. Right. So now I'm 3 months in a row of this. And then our fourth month, we had another provider suicide from our organization, a younger kid, unfortunately. So in the span of 4 months, it was just like you just get beat down and beat down and beat down. And like I said, I never got ahead of it. I was never able to from the first thing, right? I didn't deal with that appropriately. And so now you start stacking all this stuff. And I just was like almost not quite catatonic, but again, just a wash, rinse, repeat. Go to work, go home, go to work, go home. And I saw it at home, right? I was ornery with the kids and snapping at everybody and just wasn't myself, but I wasn't picking up on it, and nobody else was able to until one day at work, somebody said, "Hey, I think you need to go talk to somebody." And I was like, "You're probably right." And I did, right? And it was really good. It was, I just feel like there are so many resources out there. It's just such a shame when we lose another person and think about like that, folks just don't realize the impact that they have, right? That's always that pebble in the pond kind of thing. That ripple effect is huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Don't be sorry. That's what you're here for.
So you kind of already mentioned this. I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit, but how did being in a leadership role affect your mental health? Did the responsibility of looking after your team add additional pressures?
So initially it didn't, right? You get in there and it took over an organization that was having some challenges to begin with and really only had one direction to go, right? Which was up. And we did that. I got there in 2011. We did a lot of really good things as an organization, new building, new ambulance, rebrandings, all these different things. And really we're doing great. And then, you have this one bad thing and it's like, wow. Now, as a leader, I had always wanted to make sure that my people were well taken care of, right? So we made sure we had an EAP program. We tried to really embrace like a work-life balance kind of thing as much as you can in EMS and pay attention to folks and, have one-on-ones with them and talk about things and really pay attention to them, if we could see things that were going on in their lives. So I think as a leader, you really have to be compassionate and empathetic to your people. And you have to understand that, you were in their shoes once, what that's like. And you got to give them some space and some guidance and leadership. And it's okay to check in and check in and check in again, right? I know they're going to find it annoying, but at the end of the day, I always told people my job is to make sure you go home the same way you came to work. Yeah. Right? Your family expects that of me as your boss. And so I don't want to let them down. And so when you have those negative events happen, you immediately feel like, man, I've let this family down,
It's that whole check-in, like Dan, in our first interview, he said check in and check in often. And that's such a big thing. And I really think we need to have the compassionate leadership, that'll lead us into the whole the cultural thing of the stigma that's attached to the mental health thing in public safety. So I really do believe it does start at the top. It starts with the compassionate leadership and having leaders that are willing. And like you said, you were already in those shoes. You were at the paramedic and the EMT stages, and now being in that leadership role. And it really is. I think it's such an important thing is to have leaders that don't forget where they came from and to really know that the mental health is of the utmost importance, because if you have providers that aren't in the right mind state, you're not going to have a good provider, and you're more of a liability than an asset when you're out on the street working on the trucks.
Yeah, and there are courses and there are programs out there to teach leaders how to look at that and how to manage it. I had a couple of individuals a few different times who were EMS providers and live-in firemen, right? So they lived at a firehouse. So they just never got away. They were always at this level. They never got away from it. And so, I had to bring them in a couple times and say, like, listen, you've got to find something that gets you away from this. I can't have you come to work here for 12 or 16 or 24 hours knowing that you just came from the firehouse for 2 days on your days off, where you were, running your ass off, or you saw terrible things, because your levels, you don't ever have time to come down, and so you again, as a leader, you got to recognize that, or know your people. You got to know your people, and that was hard. When I went to DC, I had 400 employees. So, I couldn't know every one of them. I had to have faith in the leadership team that I had assembled that they were doing that and they were checking in and they were reporting back, because I couldn't have those one-on-ones as often as I wanted to with 400 people. So it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's important to the mental health and wellness of your organization.
Yes. That'll lead us right into this, Jeff. So in that leadership role, what have you observed about the culture of mental health in emergency services over the years? And have you seen any positive changes in reducing that stigma that's associated with it?
I would say absolutely, right? I think about when I first got into it, and it was the whole suck it up, buttercup, eat your young kind of thing. I don't think we're there anymore. I think I'd like to think that we're in a better spot from able to identify folks, right? I think able to engage folks a little bit better. But I think more importantly, I would like to think that folks are more inclined to reach out for help now than they would have been before, for a couple of reasons, right? They realize that they're not alone, that, that the world is a better place with them in it, that it's really important that they know that they're loved and they're cared about, and that, we'll get through it. Whatever it is, we'll get through it. My experience has always been, unfortunately, that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and that's true, right? I mean, whatever is happening right now, this too shall pass, right? Like we will get through it. As bad as you think it is, we can get better,
Come out the other side even better.
Yeah. And that's the only thing you can hope for, right? Is that you have a reason to get up every day and put your feet on the floor and take that first breath, right? Like I said earlier, better to be seen than viewed, right? You don't want to, you only get one shot to do this, and you've been chosen to do it. So I've changed my mindset to try to make the best of it, both for myself personally and for the people when I was a leader. I tried to make it better for them. I tried to give them the resources that they needed to do their job, and then let them go, right? Let them do their job. And so, but at the same time, checking in with them, making sure they're okay. Did they have what they needed? How are the families doing? Being interested, truly interested in what's going on in their life.
Yeah. Because it's not just there. They have a home life too. And I think that whole work life and home balance is such an important thing to be able to try to nurture and make important.
Yeah. And people say like, oh, you should leave home at home. And it's like, well, you can't do that, right?
No
but
way.
if you're bringing it to work, right? Let's talk about it. What's going on? Can we help it? Can we, do you need to go home? I mean, that's where I think, the industry is starting to do things in a better light, where before, like from a mental health perspective, I couldn't just say it was a workers' comp claim, right? Because nobody was paying for it. Now we have legislation that says, hey, we identify PTSD and PTSI as mental health issues, and we can pay for that. So, I mean, I think that legislation and the things that are moving forward open up the doors for us to be more well-rounded when we're talking about mental health and mental well-being, because before we didn't have those avenues. I'd want to send somebody home, and the first thing they'd say to me is like, well, am I going to get paid? Because like I need to get paid, and so, yeah. The question was, is it better? Have things been moving in the right direction? I think absolutely.
And it's what we want. That's all we can ask for. And that moved right. So are you able to explain the role in the Change the Culture initiative, and what progress have you seen, and what areas still need improvement?
Yeah, so probably 2016, 2017, I think it was, EMS West wanted to move forward. We'd had, unfortunately, a rash of provider suicides and just a whole bunch of things around mental health. And so we were tasked, when I say we, was a member of the board then. And so we were talking about how do we sort of bring this to light. So we developed, it was called Change the Culture, right? It was a group that put together a few informative sessions in the region on identifying mental health, resiliency and those kinds of things. We brought in the gentleman from San Diego Fire who had been stabbed on the platform to talk about his story and the circumstances that, how he dealt with it. And then the year after that, we had another symposium. I think it would have been maybe 2018. We brought in a therapist from Grand Rapids, Michigan, sort of an expert in first responder, public safety, mental health. And, he really shed a lot of good light on it. Coming from the therapist perspective, he talked about all of the things, the check the boxes, right? The take better care of yourself physically, journal, do those other kind of things. But he said something that was resonating with a lot of folks. And he said, he had a younger kid, who called his grandmother on the phone and left a message about coming over to bake the pie with her later, and then went and committed suicide. So, right. So he, as his therapist, thinks, did I miss something? Was there something going on? And how he dealt with it, right, which was interesting, was basically like, you just never know. You never know.
Never know.
You think you do, but you just have no idea. And that's one of those things that I've tried to talk about with my kids from a kindness perspective. You never know what somebody else is dealing with. And, we want to be there for folks, and we want to think we're helping them through dark times. And maybe a lot of times we are, but at the end of the day, sometimes people either don't want to be helped or saved, or it's never enough. Right.
Yeah.
But to change the culture, it kind of fizzled out with I left in 2019, so I don't really know if anything happened after that, but I think the pandemic, kind of pushed it to the lower priority list. And I feel like it should be something maybe we get back in the region and talk about, have these symposiums and have these education days and talk about, tools for leadership and things like that. One of the big classes that we did was the difficult conversations. Dr. Roth and Dr. Swab put together a difficult conversations class for leaders. And it's really about, when somebody comes into your office and closes the door and said, hey, this morning I was in the parking lot with a gun to my head, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get through the day. What do you do? Right. And so, unfortunately, I've had the circumstances, right, as a leader. I've had that where the person's come in and shut the door and said, I was outside and this was what I was about to do. And, dropped everything, stopped the pressing, and spent my entire day working through the problems and the issues with this person, to the point where I was able to get them into an emergency therapy appointment, which led to an emergency hospitalization, which, got them so much better. And, they're still here today because of that. But
thank goodness, man.
Wow. Yeah, it's and again, you don't think that that's going to happen to you until it does happen. And as a leader, you've got to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And fortunately, right, I don't consider myself any, whatever, but I was lucky that I had that experience and that background, so that when that person came in and closed the door and said, I need help, I was able to do it for them. And I don't know that, I commended them so much for coming in, but more importantly, I think from a leadership perspective, I was just happy that I was there to help them through it. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome, Jeff.
Thank you.
It's awesome, man.
We've become very good friends, right? She's a great friend of mine. This happened when I was in DC, and, we've become very good friends. And, she's here 6 years later because she came into my office and said, I'm at rock bottom. I need help. And that's really, right, the message should be, we all need help with something.
It is, and we're all human. I think that's the huge take home, is we all have issues, whether it's work issues or home issues or anything along those lines. And that as a leader and just as a human being, the humanity of that, and actually knowing that just in that split second you help to save someone's life, and that's what a thing to be able to be part of.
Yeah. It was pretty cool, right? Because I know that there's been other circumstances where, I've gotten there a couple minutes too late.
Yeah, absolutely. So the counseling and the support, you said you did seek counseling multiple times. What advice would you give someone in EMS who's hesitant to seek help?
I would encourage them to seek out the right help, right? I felt like that first time was like, whew, it really turned me off, right? So being able to find the right help, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist, right? I mean, it could be, It could be a teacher, an educator, someone in your church, someone in your golf club. I mean, just somebody that you can go and talk to that's going to understand a little bit about what's going on, right? They don't have to know everything, right? I've always heard that thing is like, well, what could a person who's not in EMS tell me about what I'm going through? And my argument to that would be like, well, how many therapists do you know were former drug dealers or drug users, right?
Yeah.
But yet they're counseling and therapy, being able to provide therapy for those folks. So I think that's an excuse. But I would also say if you have the ability to seek out somebody that has that experience, that would be your best avenue, right? Like I would work to find somebody in that realm. But if you can't, then I would just work to find somebody that you can trust and have a relationship with. And you learn so much about yourself, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, I learned some things about myself. I was like, oh, well, okay, that kind of makes sense, And so I think that it's important to sort of know thyself, right? And understand that, to your point, Bart, we're all human and we all have triggers and we all have buttons that, our kids push, right? And that kind of thing. And, but I think that all of those things that we've been, quote unquote, taught to look for are real because I've experienced them, right? That short fuse, that snap, that, feeling down for no apparent reason, that not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to go to work. Like, I feel like I've experienced all of that. And so to be able to say like, oh, I've gone through all of that and I've still been able to come out better on the other side is really good. And so my advice would be, you're not alone. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to seek that help, but you've got to take some self-responsibility as well. There's got to be some things, if you go to a therapist and they say, hey, you should try this or do this, you should probably try this or do this, you shouldn't just go like, oh, well, I went to therapy, I should be cured, because that's not how it works.
Right.
You have to find the things that allow you to deal with the problems that you're having.
With having our other guest on, it was Dominic Lazzini. He had a really good perspective being involved in public safety and his family being in the fire department for such a long time. And then now a therapist. And he even said with his job, he's like, I'm not helping you. I'm helping you help yourself. And like you said, that responsibility and that accountability to yourself is that's the main important thing, is having your own accountability. So what
you say, I went to the gym 5 days a week for 2 months and nothing happened. Did you lift a weight? Did you get on the treadmill, or did you just walk into the gym and
stay on your phone?
Stay on your phone, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the weights aren't going to lift themselves. You have to, I think that's the other. Yeah, you got to put in the work, and if you want to truly do it, I don't know anybody that wouldn't want to, right? I think you need the nudge to do it.
Yeah.
Even just building on top of the therapist. So Dom was on the show a couple episodes ago, and he was a very analytical, very well spoken. I don't know what kind of word for it, but very knowledgeable. And we're actually speaking to another therapist that also specializes in PTSD and public safety. And she's like just total opposite realm of, she's like, I don't really want questions. Like, let's sit and just have a conversation. And she's really relaxed and chill. And it just kind of shows you too, just the two different people that we spoke to already in that field, how different it can be. So you got to find that right therapist. Like you said, that first therapist wasn't for you. Some might like that analytical therapist that'll hit you with numbers, and then she's very relaxed and just wants to have a conversation, and wherever you want to go with that, you go with that. So it's important to find which one works for you and what avenue you want to take on it. But there's so many different avenues out there, and I think people just got to realize, like, you're not going to go to your first one and be like, yes, I'm going to be cured, like, this is it. But you got to kind of play the field and see which one that you like and works for you.
Yeah, you have to, again, you have to put in the work. You've got to listen to them. You've got to find a fit, right? Because to your point, Brittany, not everybody's, like I said, that first lady, when I saw her crying, I was like, well, she is definitely not, she's not the right person to be telling this stuff to, and that was frustrating.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yeah, it was frustrating, but I was like, okay, well, right? Because then right away I was like, am I that screwed up that she's crying, or am I just like, okay, that's not the right person?
Well, no, you too. Your provider instincts probably flip-flopped, and then you're probly taking care of her.
Yeah, I was like, hey, are you okay? And she was like, I'm sorry. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, is this because of what I'm telling you? Like, I don't think this is going to work. But you don't know, right? I mean, it was my apprehension for going there. I don't think I had apprehension. I think I wanted to get fixed, right? I mean, I like I said, I got up and didn't want to go to work. I mean, I'd had those bad shifts. I mean, I had 3 bad shifts in a row, and each one of those calls that happened on that shift could have happened literally in one day, right? So can you imagine if I would have done all of those things in one shift, which I'm sure people have, that how that weighs on you,
Yeah.
you know?
So, what role does peer support groups play in mental health for emergency providers, and how do you think they can be implemented or improved?
Well, I think they play a very important role. I think you have to have folks who can be empathetic, who can be knowledgeable about what they're doing. Right? I don't know that the best peer support group is the same 4 buddies you go to the bar with, or that you even if you go to the gym with them. But like, if you're talking with them, if you're working through things, that could be peer support, right? But a true peer support team that comes into maybe your station, I'll just tell you, when I was at MRTSA, when we got our dog, CJ, right? When he came into the station, I could literally feel my blood pressure drop, right? Like, just having the dog around was just enough to be like, okay. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's like, oh, it's a puppy. It's like babies, right? Like,
It's a puppy.
so, yeah. So I feel like those teams are important to have. I think not every organization needs to have one, right? I think we don't want to saturate it. We don't want to water down the importance of what a peer review team or peer response team is. But I think having the accessibility to one, being able to reach out to, again, to like people, to some folks who may or may not be able to sympathize, right? I tell people, just because you're a paramedic or just because you're a firefighter doesn't mean that you've experienced some of the things I'm about to tell you that I've experienced, right? So you might think you're doing right by listening to me, but at the end of the day, you really have to connect, and you do have to know and understand. So there's that mantra of it. But at the same time, I feel like the importance of being available, being there, understanding what's going on with folks, and being a resource, right? I think the peer supports are a resource. They're not the end all be all, but it might be the right group of folks that can get you where you need to be. So I would encourage, regionally or whatever, those agencies to get involved, to have peer support groups, to have dogs, to have, things that are outside of work. I talked earlier about those people who never leave public safety. They're off work, so they're hanging out the firehouse. So they work as a fireman and they moonlight as a paramedic, or, whatever. Like, if you don't ever get away from it, you're never going to get away from it,
Yeah. That's a tough thing. And I mean, I saw that over and over again, any of whether it's EMS or the 911 jobs, you see it, people don't get away from it, and that's that balance. Like, when I'm outside of work, I don't think about 911 or never, or EMS. And my luck was having Britt here, who actually knew what was going on because she was involved in it also. So she's the one who's like,
we're going to the gym.
We're going to the gym. You better calm it down.
Get on that treadmill.
Yeah. But how nice, right, to have that support. I mean, that's where I think, like, a lot of folks, they don't have that, or they don't know how to get away. They don't know how to turn off the radio, and they don't know how to, it's interesting when you do the research about, unfortunately, provider suicides, right? And you look to see, like, those old folks who retire out of the fire jobs, right? But then they're not around the firehouse anymore, so they lose their identity. Like, when you leave work, you still have an identity. You're still a human being. You're still you. But if you have that complex of, like, the savior, or I need to be there, that's going to eat you up.
Sure. For sure.
So you talked about the work-life balance. How did you learn how to balance shielding your family from challenges of your work while staying open about your struggles?
I didn't do a very good job of that. I totally excluded them, really. I mean, I don't feel like I tried to shield them from the issues and the things. Now, my wife is a nurse, right? So she understands some of it. But it's hard. It's hard to bring those things home with you, and again, feel like you're making your burdens their burdens, right? I think that's one of the stigmas. Is I don't want to burden you with my problems; they're my problems. But at the end of the day, if you don't share, right? If you don't talk about them, if you don't have a good partner, a good support system, it's not going to be good. So it's not easy. You have to work just like everything else, right? You have to work at it. You have to decide what's the middle of the road there, right? You might not want to have the discussion about the terrible, nasty call over dinner with the family, right? But you might want to talk about it, when you go to bed with your spouse or when you have alone time or something like that. So, and again, like I alluded to earlier, now that I'm a father of a provider, I soak that up, right? When he calls me and says, "Oh, I did this, or I saw this, or this awesome call," I'm like, "That's great, fantastic!" Like that's right. It's a pride thing, right? Super proud of him, but at the same time, I love that he's willing to share, and I love that he's willing to open up when he's maybe having some issues as well.
Absolutely.
And so again, I see it from a different perspective, but. I will tell you, when I was a provider, when I was single, right, didn't have that extended support. I didn't take that home to my parents. I certainly didn't share that with my brother and sisters. Like I just kept it all down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that that's not, we know that that's not the right thing to do. And, you gotta let it out somehow. Journal, gym, walking, a dog, getting away from it, right? I found that, just getting away from it when I was a provider, not going from job to job to job to job to job, right? Working 85 hours a week. That's not a life, So if you gotta change some things to be a little bit more mentally, mental health aware, then you need to do that. So, and you can, right? People say, "Oh, I need the money." Well, what are you paying? Are you looking at your bills? Are you paid attention to, go somewhere where rent is better, buy a lesser car, shop your insurance. You don't need the greatest and latest iPhone, right? Like live within your means, be smart about your money, and you won't have to work 85 hours a week. Like, but,
You mentioned your son in the public safety field now, which is just amazing because I remember him running around as a toddler. What advice do you give your son and others starting out in EMS and maintaining their mental health?
the biggest advice I would give them is just understand the impact it can have on you, right? Some people don't know what their mental health can actually do to them, right? Take each day as a gift. Learn from the mistakes that you've made, learn from the good things and the bad things. My advice to him is always, it's one call at a time. When that call is done, you can put it away. And yes, it might come back later, but you have to be able to do this job on a routine basis, but at the same time, you have to be able to step away from it. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Yeah. You have to be resilient, right? Because the next call is waiting, but when that call's done, maybe you need to go back to, 2 or 3 calls ago and be like, "Hey, let's talk about this." My perspective on it is different because everybody else's perspective is different. That's the thing that I think is interesting as well, right? If you've ever sat through like a CISM where everybody comes together, everybody's perspective on that call is different. And you don't know what they saw or did before you got there and how it's affected them differently. I'll give you, for instance, we were on a debriefing afterwards where the first arriving people there were visibly and emotionally shaken because of what they saw. But by the time I got there in the first medic unit, what they saw was done and over with, and there weren't any issues, right? Yeah. So it's a bus accident, right? And they show up and there's all these kids pounding on the windows and screaming, "Help me, help me, help me." And that plays in their mind. By the time I get there in the first medic unit, all those kids are out of the bus. They're up the hill with a couple sprained ankles and nobody's really injured. So I get there and I didn't live on that part. Right. But like that person or those people that got there first, and the vision in their mind is like, oh my God, these kids are trapped. It's terrible. So same incident.
Totally different perspective.
Totally different perspective.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really about that, understanding that, recognizing how you're gonna deal with it. And again, the biggest thing I think as a dad is, take time to step away, get away from it, go fishing, go biking, go to the casino, right? Like, I mean, you can have some vices, right? You can go to the bar and have a couple drinks. You don't want to go to the bar and drown your sorrows, right? You don't want to have a gambling problem. You can go to the, casino, whatever.
Go have some fun outside of public safety. Get out of there.
Healthy outlets.
Healthy. There you go. Healthy outlets. Yeah.
The gym.
The gym is a great outlet.
Yeah, if I don't go for a few days, it just piles up and I'm like, I need to get there. You just feel it. You got that brain's telling you got to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So the suicides of your team members definitely had a profound impact on you. How do you think the industry can better address like these tragic issues?
The first thing I would say is don't run away from them, right? We got a lot of really good feedback because the first one especially, right? We embraced that. We brought in the Code Green campaign and the Cranberry, and while we weren't out publicizing what happened, we weren't afraid to say what happened, right? We were willing to acknowledge that we had an unfortunate episode with one of our folks who, as it turned out, right, what we learned later, just had a lot of deep, dark secrets that we didn't know about. Again, you never know what somebody's dealing with, right? And so I think having those circumstances happen and learning how to deal with them, unfortunately, right, is important. As far as from a leadership perspective, how would you prevent them, right? It's all about, like we talked about earlier, recognizing some changes in people, knowing your people, understanding what to look for, not being that suck it up buttercup mentality, right? Being that, like, I mean, it doesn't have to be to the extreme of we're going to pet the kitty, but there's got to be some, it's a tough industry.
It is
tough. It beats you up physically. It beats you up mentally. It beats you up emotionally. Again, you're there on people's worst days. Even if it's not a bad day, it's their worst day. And so, I would tell folks that you have to learn to identify it, have avenues to deal with it as a leader. And unfortunately, if circumstances happen that you're in that same boat, understand that you're not alone. And, you try to figure out how to keep it from happening again. The hardest thing for me wasn't the first one that happened. It was when it happened so recently, a second time, and completely different circumstances, right? I mean, totally different circumstances, but nonetheless, happened on your watch, happened to your people. And, it's just a gut punch. But, again, I'd put on a face, right? I had 40 people that I was responsible for. I mean, when the first circumstance happened, it was community days. So it was a 4-day long event. So like, that doesn't just stop because we've had this provider suicide. Like, we have to be prepared for community days, and we have to get staffing, and we have to do this. We have to, like, all these different things. So you go from 0 to 100 right now, and you're that way until, maybe till after the funeral, but probably not, like, so yeah, it's not, and it's probably one of the reasons I got out of EMS leadership, to be honest with you. You get to a point where I'm like, man, I'm taking care of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's a big responsibility, and it weighs a lot on you. And that's, you're waiting for that phone call of like, hey, this happened. And, I'm in a position now where I don't really have that kind of a phone call, like we've had, unfortunately, our team has had some bad things happen to it in the last 2 years that I've been there. And that's been hard, but it's not like gut punch, oh my God, what am I going to do hard? It's like, man, I feel so bad for that person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so for me, from a personal perspective, and maybe that's selfish, but I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I feel like that from a personal perspective, it's better for me and better for my family.
You've definitely
I
earned
miss-
your stripes. You've earned your stripes.
I miss the people. Don't get me wrong. I miss
Yeah.
the people, but I don't miss that level of, again, it's like having 40 other children, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm constantly worried about where they are, what they're doing. Is everything okay? Are they, and that wears on you, and you live and die by your phone, right? I mean, your phone calls, all that stuff. So EMS leadership is not easy. If it was, everybody would do it. Right. But at the same time, Bart, I feel like I've earned my stripes, and I feel like it was a great chapter in my life. It provided me a lot of great learning things and a bunch of opportunities that I could never get otherwise, but I'm okay to leave it in the rearview mirror.
Absolutely. And I think when it was a few months ago, we all got together up at the Lenses cabin up there. That was fantastic. Just seeing everyone again. Like a lot of people that I haven't seen since leaving Ross, and then actually seeing you, I was like, oh my goodness, this is Jeff Kelly. How you been? Because I didn't know what you got into after I knew about AMR, but I didn't know what else you were getting into. But it was nice to catch up again. And now look at today, it's even better.
Yeah, no, I listen, I've tried to stay in touch with those folks that impacted me and that I've tried to feel like I've had an impact on. And, I every so often I love to just reach out and, send an old picture, or just I do a lot of buddy check-ins, right? And it's just a buddy check-in. How's it going? Everything okay? You doing well? And I don't know if it works, right? But to me, it's just letting folks know that, hey, I'm thinking about you. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, I can follow you on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but like that personal, nobody answers their phone, so I won't call anybody, right? But like I'll send a text to, buddy check in, and that's been good. Again, the things that we've gone through together, that's the other part of it, right? I think the things that bind you with the people that are in this industry, that's challenging, right? I mean, the stuff you see together is and
we've
go
been on
through
some
together
good calls together for sure.
We've had some really good trainings. We've done some neat things, right? Like it's been fun, right? Like,
but that's what I mean. It was such, working at Ross was such an instrumental part of my life in my adulthood. Really, it was. And when you get together with the people that made such an impact on your life, it feels good. That's why I was so excited to have you on, because I was like, yep, Jeff was one of my I said it before, he was one of my biggest cheerleaders when I first started. And it really, as a brand new provider, it was great to have someone in your corner, you know what I mean, to take it on and be like, okay, let's nurture this and let's give them the good side of EMS and let's put them in the right direction. And it led to a great career. Almost 12 years there, and I loved every minute of it. But I thank you. Seriously, Jeff, I thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, it's nice to know that I helped somebody, right? Like, for me, it is a little bit like, it gets you in the feels a little bit where you're like, because you don't know, right? You have no idea. It's one of I think the downfalls of our industry, right? We take care of a patient and we don't know what happens, right? But to your point, we take care of people that are working with us, and sometimes we don't know what happens with them, or did we do a good job? So thank you for validating my what I did for you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. That's what it's about. Gotta lift each other up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Lifting each other up and being there for each other. Just be kind, right? I have this motto, this new thing that started last year. It's called do better, right? It's just do better. Whatever it is, right? Just do better. Do better next hour than you did this hour. Do better tomorrow than you did yesterday. Just do better, be better, strive to do that. And that's really been helpful, right? I mean, that and a lot of good music. I mean, I'm a big music guy.
Oh, yeah. It's life, man. Music is life for sure.
It sure is. So, yeah.
Where do you see mental health advocacy and public safety going in the next 5 to 10 years? And what steps need to happen now to ensure lasting changes?
So I think the legislation was a big thing. I think being able to have an avenue for chiefs and directors and agencies to get help for their folks, recognizing and identifying that PTSD, PTSI is a true thing and it needs help. I think that is good, and I think that will just expound upon in the next couple of years. I love the idea, like I said, of the peer support groups. I would like to see continued education for leaders and providers, and just different things that maybe can help with some of the facets of the job that we weren't taught in class, right? There's a couple good classes out there that people put on about providers talking to families about death and dying, right? Like doing the death announcement and what that kind of stuff. I think those things are all important because they help us with our everyday lives of what we're experiencing as a clinician and as a provider. But I think from a mental health perspective, I think having, peer support, the legislation that provides for identification and compensation for those things, time off. I think we can do better at it. I think we'll get there. I think, we're like everything else, we're learning from our past mistakes. And so we're seeing sort of a what not to do.
Yeah.
And so while we've seen what not to do, the only thing we can do now is change it for the better. And so I think that in the next couple of years, it will get better. Does that mean we're going to, zero is never an option, right? I mean, it's just not going to be, like we talked about earlier. But helping one person, helping 5 people, providing resources to help folks get through a dark time in their life is good, right? We're so ingrained in taking care of other people and so compassionate for other people that we just need to hold up a great big mirror and say, what about our folks?
Yeah.
Take a look at us, and don't be afraid to look inward and see what you can do. Again, as a leader, as a provider, you don't need a title to be a leader, right? You can be a leader in mental health awareness and mental health education and erasing mental health stigma. So my challenge to all of your listeners would be to, be that change agent.
Awesome. So you mentioned your peer support groups. Is there any other specific books or programs or other resources that have helped you and your team that you would recommend to people listening?
We leaned on Code Green. I don't know how much they're doing right now, but there are some EMS specific things that are out there. I would research some of that stuff. I think from a reading perspective, again, if there are books about how to deal with your own mental health, how to be compassionate and be a provider for other folks. And I don't know by name, I'm just kind of throwing things out there. I think that stuff would be important to go along with it. There are some programs and some education around that peer support groups. And so I would look to embrace that stuff. We have a really good resource here in Western Pennsylvania, in Heidi Wiggin. She's a EMS yoga specialist, right? And so she is fantastic at what she does, and being able to bring her in and again, kind of work through the steps of what that process is and how that helps you. Again, all of this with the goal of mental clarity and mental well-being is what we should do. So whatever that is, we reading, peer supports, service dogs, legislation. Again, the goal should be improving and getting rid of the stigma, but improving the mental health for providers.
Do you do all the yoga moves?
I do some of them.
Yeah,
I've been able to. Yeah, what I've found more appropriate for me has been meditation.
Yeah.
Meditation has been much better, just because my back and my shoulders and my knees, But stretching is important. But the meditation, I think, has been really nice. That 5 minutes of just deep thought and breathing,
the calm mind.
Yeah,
I love it.
How sweet it is that you can be able to do that. And I'm sure there's going to be people who say, "Oh, we never get that." You have that. You have that time. You find that time. Again, it's what you make of it. You make that time. So you can't make excuses. At the end of the day, it all has to rest with you. And you, like I said earlier, you got to have a little bit of self-responsibility about it.
That accountability to yourself.
Yeah, you got to want to do it. If you don't want to do it, it's going to be kind of hard for other people to do it for you, no matter what their role is. So,
Here's the last one, Jeff. You ready for the big one?
Bring it.
Let's go, buddy. If you could leave one message for your listeners, especially those in public safety, what would it be?
take care of each other. Watch out for each other. Be kind, be empathetic, do better. We're all in it together. There's nobody on an island doing this themselves. You know, whether we've been to that terrible call or whether we've never experienced it in our career, we all have something to share and to give. And so just be better.
Be better, do better, and take care of each other.
Do better. Yeah. Be that change agent.
That's it.
All it takes is some kindness and some listening.
It's amazing what it could do, right?
Yeah,
a little bit of active listening and a little bit of do better, be better.
I think it's so easy to be kind. It's hard to be, to me at least. I try to live. I do. I try to live that life of just trying to be kind, and it does come naturally for me. But I see people out there that they thrive on the ignorance and being that asshole. You know what I mean? It's so much easier to be nice, and I think that's what we need to convey to everyone. Just be nice, be kind.
It's hard for people though, right? There are some people that they can't get out of their own way.
Yeah.
Be nice. And you guys are two. I always think of two of the nicest people, right? I always feel like the two of you together. I don't know anybody, right? I don't know anybody that has a bad thing to say about either one of you. And I've never heard either one of you say a bad thing about somebody.
Thank you.
It's how we try to live our lives, man. We try to just be good. And, you know, Britt always, we go over, I go over it constantly in my brain when I was sick in 2020. And I always bring it up just because it's such it's a prolific thing in my brain. And Britt said when I was in the hospital, she prayed every night to make sure that I would come home. And if I did, he would do something great. And I think not me doing anything great, it's us doing something great is, you know, I think this was honestly our calling to provide a space for pre-hospital providers and dispatchers to share their story. You know, if it helps one person, if someone watching your episode or anyone else's episode, if it helps one person to, you know, make that call in that time of need, that's what it's worth it. That's the whole point of it, is to make sure that, you know, we make it another day. And I do. I when she told me that, I'm like, this is it. This is the reason that we're doing this, is because I was able to survive that whole incident because of, now I see, obviously because of my family, but this is the reason that I'm here. This is the reason that I want us to be able to provide that for people. So Jeff, seriously, thank you for being on, man. It's been an honor to have you on.
The most important days in your life, right? The day you were born and the day you found out why.
That's it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I couldn't be happier that you guys are doing this. I wish you great success. I think it's going to be just a fantastic thing and a great platform, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Jeff, it was an honor, man. It was an honor. She's fogging up.
Good to see you guys.
She's fogging up over there. Well, guys, again.
Well, I appreciate you guys, and I think you're doing great things, so continue to do that.
Absolutely. That's the mission. It's our mission and your story. That's what we like, that little saying, our mission, your story.
I love that.
Great. But if anyone would like to be like Jeff here, to be on the show, just give us an email at twwcpodcast@proton.me. Drop us a line and we'll see what we can do to get you on. Jeff, again, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for being a mentor to me when I first got into EMS, and you continue on and doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys. And as always, it's a pleasure to see you guys, and continue to do better, be safe.
Heck yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, guys, you have a good one.
And Jeff, you still?